Hi, my name is Seth Sharp. We're doing an interview for San Miguel Archives. Today is January 21st, 2010. Today we're going to be talking with Farley Wheelwright.
Hello.
So you ready to do this?
Yes.
Excelente. So my name is Seth Sharp. We are here with my buddy Farley Wheelwright, who is a resident of San Miguel. And we're going to find out a little bit about your life, what brought you here. Maybe we'll get some stories.
Well, I'm 93 years old, so I got lots of stories.
I bet you do.
And I'm not sure how many of them will be of interest to you. I was born and brought up in Boston, and I come from a long, old Boston family. And when I retired at the age of 65, I thought I'd go back to Boston to die because there's a family plot in Forest Hills all just waiting for me. Boston, however, has some cruel winters. And after I did an interim, I was a Unitarian Universalist minister. And having done
A Unitarian Universalist minister?
Yes.
Wow.
And having done an interim ministry at the Arlington Street Church, which is the flagship of our denomination, that was a great honor to have done that. And I was ready to settle down. However, Boston has cruel winters, and we came to Mexico just on a visit, and happened onto San Miguel de Allende, quite an era. I'd come to Mexico to see a friend in another city, and we were very unhappy with the visit. And someone there said, "Why don't you be a little happier in San Miguel?" And without having any idea about San Miguel, we arrived here and fell in love with it, and did the usual thing that one does in San Miguel, bought a house. This was about 22 years ago.
Wow.
And for anybody who's moving to San Miguel today, won't believe the charm of this town. Instead of SUVs, burros occupied the streets. And you saw more of old Mexico and less turistica here. But however, we bought a house on the Salida Querétaro, Cruz del Pueblo, overlooking the city. And what we did was to buy the view, because it was one hell of a walk up the hill to get to that house. And once there, we had to walk up the flight of stairs to get to the front door. And once in the front door, the house was 3 stories high, and so you had 2 flights of stairs to cope with. However, it had beautiful terraces, a beautiful view, and I miss it. In fact, I miss the San Miguel of 22 years ago. However, I haven't been idle here. I wasn't idle before. As a minister, I was involved to an extraordinary degree in the abortion counseling business, in providing young women and many middle-aged women too with illegal but safe abortions. You can't imagine now what a boom that was to society, and this was in Cleveland.
And what year was that?
Well, it was before Roe v. Wade, and when you're my age, years sort of blend, and I can't tell you. It was in the 80s, I guess, maybe the 70s, somewhere way back in ancient history. I was also involved and became personally a friend of Martin Luther King Jr., and so got involved in the civil rights movement in a major way. both in Selma and in spending 2 summers doing voter registration in Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia. All wonderful, wonderful experiences which prepared me for a life on the left wing of politics and of justice and of meeting the needs of people. I came from a very sort of proud middle-class family of manufacturers. And it may be of interest to note as a historical event that 22 years ago, my grandfather's estate, the trust finally broke up by the death of the last surviving person named in the will, and I got my share of it. And I was able to buy this large-ish, not enormous, but a largish house for $47,000.
Wow. Is that here in San Miguel?
In San Miguel, yes. It had 3 bedrooms, and by the time we got through ordering it had 5 bathrooms, because we had to have a bathroom at least on every floor, and on some floors too, where there were bedrooms. So when I came here, I was retired. I'd passed my phase in social action. I was 93 minus 22, figured out how old I was. And the first thing I wanted to do was to learn Spanish. Of course, if I'm going to live here, it made only sense to learn Spanish. So I went to the Institute had wonderful teachers, and I'd been fair to getting to understand a little bit about Spanish, and also to help in the creation of a Unitarian Universalist Fellowship here in San Miguel, which is the only one in all of Mexico, except in Mexico City, where they have a fellowship which is not accredited in the denomination as yet.
Were you a part of setting that up?
No, it was all set up before I came, and when I came here, I was the last person that the founders of this fellowship wanted to see, because I was a minister, and they wanted a fellowship that was lay-led, and I was a threat to them, and so I was most unwelcome at that fellowship. After a few years, they got used to me, and when they needed a minister to bury or otherwise do ministerious functions, they called upon me, and they found me harmless.
Are you harmless?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I am by nature a very active person. I'm married to a woman who is by nature a very active woman. She was, when I was a minister, she was the vice president of the Women's Federation of the whole denomination. So she was very active. And I must say that, I got a little bored going to school every day. And one day, unannounced to me, 2 people came to my house one Sunday afternoon and asked me if I would like to be a panel to upset and turn over the management of the Biblioteca Publica. And they recited some of the complaints they had about the former management, and they said that I could be the corresponding secretary if we won the election. And I said, what were the duties of a corresponding secretary? And they said, well, really only to answer letters to people who made contributions, and since nobody ever contributed anything to the Biblioteca, I really didn't have anything to do except go to board meetings. And so I said yes. And by the time it came for the election, they had changed my position from corresponding secretary to second vice president, which seemed like a safe enough berth because I really knew nothing about running a library. I found out neither did anybody else who was on the panel. And so the election was held. The less said about that election, the better. Clyde, what is his last name?
Ellis?
Clyde Ellis, yes, thank you. Clyde Ellis was the president, and he was displaced by Kendall Butler, and we moved in to run a library knowing nothing about the mechanics of it, except that we had split the community in two in the process of it. It was something about which I'm not particularly proud, neither am I particularly ashamed of it, because that's not what I came to San Miguel for, to get involved in a political brouhaha, but there I was, and somehow or other it fit my character.
One of the things
I just want to tell you one thing about this library thing. 6 months into our tenure, Kendall had a nervous breakdown because of the tensions that were involved. She was actually sent to jail during the campaign, and so the first vice president became the president. He hadn't been the president for 24 hours before they discovered that he had some kind of cancer of the lungs, I think, and took off to California to be cured. And suddenly, lo and behold, guess who was the president of the Biblioteca? And at that time, my education in Spanish came to an end, and I was a full-time officer at the Biblioteca. And those are very happy days and very unhappy days. I must say I enjoyed the recreation of the Biblioteca. We made lots of mistakes. We had a lot of opposition after the election. But if my tenure there was any one thing, I think it was to heal some of the wounds. And when our tenure got over, we had a whole new deal, new board of directors, and there have been 2 presidents since then, and the library has really transformed itself.
And how long
It was in a terrible financial position when we took over, and at some or other, we have a feeling that we saved the library, whether that's an exaggeration or not. The first month we were there, Kendall had to give $5,000 in order to pay taxes because there wasn't money in the treasury to pay the taxes. And so she was to be paid back at the rate of $1,000 a month. And when someone looked at the books and saw that there was a payment to Kendall Butler of $1,000 for the first payment, word went abroad that she had been a salaried president, and that led to more unpleasantness. But that's ancient history, and since these films, I think, are supposed to be for the history of my experiences, I think they ought to be included. What else do you want to know?
Well, how long were you president?
Well,
of the Biblioteca?
I was president, I said, about two years, and then we had an appointed president, Bill Bennett, who did a splendid job too. And I had a serious operation in the meantime and was out of business, but I recovered from that. And I felt I still had to do something. In the meantime, my wife had got herself immersed in Jóvenes Adelante. She was a co-creator of a charity to raise money to send poor Mexican students who otherwise would never have an education to the university. And they started with 4, and now they have over 90, I believe, students who have either completed or in the course of education. So she should be on this program, really not high, because her contribution to San Miguel has been enormous. Mine has been peripheral.
Well, maybe we can get her too on a different interview.
Yeah. What else do you want to know?
So you worked, for 2 years you were the president of the Biblioteca, and how long in total did you work with the Biblioteca?
Well, I worked with them. After that, I was on the board as a board member. I forgot an unimportant title, but it required an active participation. It was an active board, and we met all the time because it was one crisis after another. A word about San Miguel. It was really a charming town. Tourism was big business then as now, but not as big.
This was like 20 years ago?
Yeah, 20 years ago. You could afford to live here on your Social Security. Fortunately, I have a little outside income, so I can afford to live here with Social Security plus pension, plus a little bit more, and so I have no complaints. But friends of mine I see are leaving San Miguel because they can't afford to live here on Social Security, and many do.
And where are they moving to?
God knows, a lot of them, of course, when you get my age, why you get into a lot of health problems. So a lot of them are moving back to the US where they have Medicare and they can afford to be sick. Here, you can't really afford to be sick. When I came, there was no hospital. Since then, they created the Hospital de la Fe, and the general hospital was small and was overcrowded, and they've since built a new hospital, and it's excellent. It's far superior to the services, in my opinion, than you get at the private hospital, except for the accommodations. It's not a good place to sleep over, but for medical care and emergency care, it beats anything that I've seen in the United States. And so that's a vast improvement. I think the people in San Miguel, the citizens, the poorer people, are probably better off with the prosperity that's come. And so my disenchantment with this large tourist industry is purely selfish. I know this is a better city for the people, for the citizen, even though it may not be quite as aesthetically rewarding for people like myself, who actually are sponges on the Mexican culture and who lap it up and love it, and sometimes I'm quite taken by it. I'm taken by a number of gringo societies that have popped up in the last 20 years, which have made the quality of intellectual life a lot higher for us. I'd say this is an ideal city for gringos. Whether it's an ideal city for Mexicans, I'm not in a position to say. But like old timers, and I feel I am an old timer just in terms of my years. And 22 years doesn't seem like a lifetime, but it's longer than I've ever lived in any one town before, since I left Boston at the age of around 20.
One of the things that I notice living here is that there's a lot of amazing people that come to San Miguel, people who have a very rich history and have done a lot of amazing things, and I think that includes you, because you've done work with Martin Luther King. You also did some major strides with having safe abortion clinics for women, before that became as big an issue as it is recently. But now, after all those experiences, that eventually you came here and decided to settle down, and like you said, it's the longest that you've been here. What is it that you like most about San Miguel and living here?
Mostly I like it because my wife is happier here than she's been in any place else. I would have been just as happy, excuse me, to go back to Boston and die a quiet death in some assisted living place there. But that would really be boring. And the one thing about my life is that it's not been boring.
You're not allowed to start now.
No, you pay a high price for moving here in terms of family. My children come and visit once or twice a year. I don't know my grandchildren as intimately as I wished I did. I don't know my great-grandchildren at all, and now with a failing memory, I can't even remember their names. And on the other hand, I never knew any of my great-grandparents, and so I figure they're not missing a hell of a lot. But maybe they are, and maybe I'm missing something. Last March, we went to my daughter's 70th birthday in Bodega, California. And the whole family gathered around, and I saw all my children and my great-grandchildren and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And it was a great thrill to see them all there and to think of myself, because I was the baby in my family, and I was accustomed to that role. But of course my brother is gone, my sister is gone, and of my 21 first cousins, only one whom I never really knew or particularly liked, they've all gone. And so to see all this progeny was very exciting on the one hand, and on the other hand, I was just delighted with the fact that I was back to the quiet of San Miguel and didn't have all these little kids making demands upon me to read the comic books to them, which leads to another reason why I'm happy in San Miguel at my age. Is about 5 years ago I started losing my eyesight, and I'm now almost entirely blind. And this is a much easier city for me to get around. When I go back to Boston to see my retinologist, I'm scared. The traffic is going too fast, and I go too slow. And I'm scared of getting run over. And although the traffic lights are wonderful there where they signal walk, I don't see them. And so I carry this barber pole cane wherever I go, so everybody will know that I don't see. And so far, I'm still alive in Boston traffic. And having been born and brought up there, I thought I'd have no trouble with the subway system, but of course the whole damn system has changed now, and they've changed the names of some of the stations, and this is a much easier place for old people to live. until you get into medical problems. I'm happy here. When I got off the board in the Biblioteca, I joined the Rotary Club because I was afraid of being bored. And I belong to an age of Sinclair Lewis and his novels about the banality of Rotary was firmly led into my mind. And it was a pleasant surprise to find this Rotary Club, far from being Sinclair Lewis Babbitt organization. They do an enormous amount of good in this town in terms of digging up projects that need to be done and educating the people in the compost as to how to go about doing it, and then finding funding from the hundreds of thousands of Rotary clubs that have lots of money, but not the same social issues as we have here. So we've raised a lot of money, and we've done a lot of good in water catchments and improving the quality of life by and large. I like San Miguel because I like nowhere in all my ministry have I found so many volunteer workers working on things like Save the Children and Patronato de Niños and myriad other organizations, to say nothing about my wife's baby, which have really changed the climate. I think it's changed the feelings that people have around here about gringos. I don't think gringos have been particularly popular, and I didn't feel, and still don't feel, totally welcomed by the Mexican population. And the fault is twofold. The fault is mine, because of the language difficulty, and because I've been involved mostly with gringos and with gringo-supported organizations. The Biblioteca, which does an enormous amount of good to Mexicans, now has Mexicans on the board, but when we went on the board, there were no Mexicans on the board. Now there are, and so there's more of a rapprochement between the Mexicans and the gringos. At least that's my perception. The Mexicans, well, I had this impression of them that the wealthy Mexicans, and there are a lot of them here, really don't do anything, and they sit back on their oar and enjoy their wealth, while the Americans are compulsively do-gooders. Not so. The Mexicans have their own Mexican societies. They have, of course, it's largely Catholic, and they have their own churches. The churches do the kind of charitable work that churches do. And so I've got a lot more respect for middle and upper class Mexicans, and enormous respect for working class Mexicans, and how hard they work for the salaries that we pay them. We have a half-time maid, and it's almost embarrassing. For an old Yankee, I was brought up in a family that had Irish Catholic maids, because Boston was a largely Irish Catholic town, and we paid their miserable salaries too. But in my lifetime, that's been changed, because I can remember the last time when I lived in Boston, we would pay a cleaning woman something like $100 a day to come in and do our dirty work for us. But to pay a cleaning woman in San Miguel, the equivalent of $100 is unthinkable. Maybe one day it'll happen. The day it happens, there's going to be a mass exodus of a lot of gringos, I think. Anyway, what have I left out that you want to hear about me?
I was a little bit more interested in the Rotary Club. You joined the Rotary Club here in San Miguel after you were at the Biblioteca. And how long were you there?
I'm still there.
Oh, you're still there?
Oh, yes, I go there every week, and I'm on the committee which investigates proposals for funds. And so I can see firsthand. I mean, we went out to Sedesa, for instance, which is a women's organization, and talk to them about what kind of needs do they want. There's a friend of mine here who used to be in the Peace Corps and later for government agencies all around the world, organizing and teaching people to learn how to help themselves instead of going in and imposing help on them. Some years ago, I went with the United Nations Association to Africa on an inspection tour. And in those days, the Peace Corps would go in and they would build latrines in these villages, and then they would leave, and the people would just still not use them. They didn't know that they needed latrines for sanitary health purposes, and they didn't know why the Peace Corps built all these latrines and tried to put people in shoes so they wouldn't get rickets because of the fecal matter that was around everywhere. And now they do differently. They train people into why they need what they need instead of supplying their needs. And that makes all the difference. The old story about teaching a man how to fish instead of giving him a fish is a cliche, but it's very appropriate in terms of helping poor. And Rotary Club here does that. It helps people in community organization and then enables them to know what their needs are, and then we come back and we help them finance the realization of these needs. Really quite a wonderful organization.
Wow. So it sounds like they're doing a lot of really good things here in San Miguel.
Well, some good things.
In helping and educating and...
Yeah, well, I was brought up in a Puritan class which believes that you help the poor. I can't believe it now, but when I was a kid in the Sunday school, every Thanksgiving, we would take baskets of food around to the homes of poor people and give it to them. Now that kind of charity is unthinkable. We do charitable work in helping people help themselves instead of doling out this kind of largesse and lèse-majesté of being a sort of superior upper class Bostonian. And as I say, the Irish have now won their spurs and are as socially acceptable as any of the old Brahmins used to be. It's unthinkable when I think of the Boston of my childhood and how important it was for our daughters to have coming out parties so that they could marry Harvard graduates and repeat the same cycle. And thank God that kind of society doesn't exist down here. Down here we have artists, and we have writers, and we have people who devote themselves to, the people who work for Feed the Hungry. There are gringos here who get up at 5 and 6 o'clock in the morning and go and distribute food in the campos all around every day, except Sunday, I think, all year round. and it's been wonderful. And by and large, I have to say I'm very happy to be in San Miguel. If I had my druthers, I would say intellectually I would rather be in Boston after I retired. I taught at Harvard Institute for Learning and Retirement and enjoyed that because it was a prestigious way of spending my old age. But now that I think of it, this is a more satisfactory way of life here. Doing what I do. I'm about to die. And that is probably uppermost in my mind. When you're 93 years old and you don't think about dying, there's something wrong with you. I'm not scared of dying. As Woody Allen once said, I'm not afraid of dying, I just don't want to be there when it happens. But I expect to be there when it happens. And this is a good place. This is a good place to die. They have this 24-hour association which comes in and takes care of the body, incinerates you, gives the ashes back to your nearest and dearest. We'll either bury them over here in the local burial grounds, or in my case, I'm going back to Boston, because I'm enough of a Bostonian still that I want something of me to lie there with my ancestors. But if somebody asked me now, where is my home? I have to say it's San Miguel. It's not Boston. The few of my best friends and dearest colleagues now are former ministers who are spread all over the continent. My sister-in-law lives in Cambridge, and I have a dozen or so people who were close friends when I was living there, but really are not close friends now. I write to them once a year, and we communicate. But this is my home, and these are my people, and I love it here.
That's really, really neat. I think a lot of people share your same sentiments. As someone who's lived here for a long time and who has a lot of experience working in the community, what do you think are some of the things, improvements or contributions that we could make in the future?
Well, I think we could build fewer $3 million houses. I think to build these large mansions, which incidentally are largely built with labor from outside of San Miguel. This latest atrocity across the street from St. Paul's Church on Cardo is a scandal. I understand when that hotel opens, it's going to be $500 a night to sleep there. I wouldn't sleep a wink if it cost me $500. But it's going to change the character to have the kind of people who can afford $500 a night aren't going to give a damn about struggling artists. And I don't think they're going to come to the philosophy group that I go to every week and is a lifesaver for me intellectually, because it keeps my mind going even though I can't read. I have a person that comes in and reads to me one day a week, and other friends read to me. Virginia reads to me when she can, but she chokes up after a while, and she can't read for any length of time. And also, she's a very busy lady in her own right. And I've always been a dependent person, and I think the only thing that I'm dissatisfied with my life is that I'm now a very dependent person. I can't go and just light the stove and cook up something if Virginia's not here. My main job and contribution to the house is to make the bed and to wash the dishes. Well, we moved in a new house and all the dishes go to a different place now, and I don't know where the hell they go. And so I wash the dishes and then I put them to one side and somebody else has to put them away. It's a very little thing, but it bugs me. And this is one of the things that I have to be used to, that really, at 93, I shouldn't be expected to do what I did at 63. And yet there's something inside me that wants to do it, that wants to go to the lectures at the Biblioteca and learn more about the Mayan and Aztec cultures. But my memory is receding now. And when I get up to speak, which is very rarely, I'm terrified. I had a memorial service that I was doing for a very dear friend of mine here a couple months ago. And at the opening, I couldn't remember her last name. And so I wanted to welcome the people that came to honor Nancy. And then fortunately, it took forever for my wife was sitting in the front row to whisper, Chase. So Nancy Chase, and then I could go on with it. But that's a very humiliating experience for a minister, particularly in that position. So I'm not putting myself in that position. I'm not doing that anymore. I've got a gay grandson who called me the other day and said, oh, I've got the love of my life, and Jess and I are going to Massachusetts to get married next year. Will you come and perform the service? And I said, no. And this was a strange thing because I performed the first same-sex marriage that was ever performed in Massachusetts. And I've done several of them, and I think that same-sex marriages are as valid if there's love involved in it as heterosexual marriages. But my capacity, since I can't read the service, and I don't want to do it from memory, I mean, worse than not remembering the name of the deceased person would be not to remember the name of the bride whom I was about to marry, whatever the sex is. When you've lived as long as I have, you've got to get used to all kinds of changes. I mean, I am really awfully glad that my dear mother isn't alive now, because I think she'd be horrified to learn that I have this gay grandson, that I had a granddaughter who married a Zimbabwean and has two of the most gorgeous children you ever saw as a result of that marriage. And my daughter, after having two very unfortunate marriages, has found the love of her life in another woman and has had this creative urge, and at the age of 68 got her PhD.
Wow.
All these things I think are just so wonderful, and they're all things that would be anathema to my upbringing. To almost everything I've ever learned about high society, can I be honest?
Please.
I think it's just plain bullshit. And
Things that have just
God
been taught and carried on.
Even that word I would never have dared say in my mother's lifetime. There was a time during my marriage when we were toying with the idea of adopting a half Korean, half black American child from the Korean War. The Koreans wouldn't take the child because it was black, and the Americans wouldn't take the child for adoption because it was Korean. And my mother said, Farley, in our family, we only have white children. Well, I'd love to ever look down and see her great-grandchildren who are half Zimbabwean and see how gorgeous they are. And really how much better a world this is and how much higher the values are that I have inculcated in my children than were inculcated into me. And although everybody makes an awful lot of fuss over my activities in social action, and I get sick of, not that I didn't love him, Martin Luther King was coming to preach my indoctrination sermon in Cleveland, and he was assassinated on Thursday before the Sunday he was due to come to Cleveland. And much as I appreciate my friendship with him and with other of the leaders in the civil rights movement, I've had a much richer life learning how to accept people as they are, not as I was brought up to have them be, and I was brought up to be myself. So on the whole, although I look at the world now and I look at the politics of the United States and deplore what I see, because I was really more active in the peace movement and the anti-Vietnam War movement than I was in the women's rights movement. I actually led a mission to Vietnam thinking that we could make it to Hanoi and be agents for peace, and got booted out of the country for my efforts. But the group that I was in paved the way for what's the name of the movie actress that did make it to Hanoi with my friend, the priest, Father Berrigan.
Mm-hmm.
And the real rewards of my life have come from being a minister, from helping people in their personal tragedies, in their bad marriages, and in their dying children, and in their faithless wives or faithless husbands, and getting a doctoral degree in pastoral counseling, and working with people and with congregations. That's really more rewarding in the long run than knowing Martin Luther King, although one of my cherished books is a book he gave me with a mellifluous dedication in it. That's all puff. That's wonderful.
But it's helping the actual people personally that is more fulfilling.
It's ministering to people, and in the course of ministering to people, being ministered by self.
Cool. Well, we're right at the end of the interview. Is there any last things that you'd like to share with people of San Miguel, based on all your experience?
Well, I have to say, San Miguel, I love you. And that's as good a coder as I can think of. To say I just wish it could stay as sweet as it was 22 years ago. But on the other hand, I'm not as sweet as I was 22 years ago, so why should I expect San Miguel to be? I think San Miguel is a wonderful place. I'm sorry it was made an international city, because I think it's going to ruin a lot of the innate, in-choate charm of the city as it becomes a major tourist resort.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes another Cabo San Lucas, which is really a rather detestable city if you've never been there. If you had been there, I was there before it boomed, and it was charming, but I understand that it's terrible. and I'd hate to see the city become another Cabo San Lucas.
Well, hopefully we'll have a few people that will watch this and take your sentiments and stop that from happening.
Well, que sera, sera.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us and talking with us a little bit.
Well, thank you for giving me the chance.
You're welcome.